let's just jump right into it, Adam. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with remasters? Do you want to start with PSVR? Or do you want to get the hot take out of the way?
I mean, can we do the virtual reality first? Because maybe it puts me in a world where I'm not in this like sauna of a room.
Sure, let's escape from your hot sauna, the desert in which you live in, and let's jump into the future and talk PSVR 2. Ladies and gentlemen, this is coming to you from Kotaku. Article is by Alexandra Hall. She writes, a video posted today by popular YouTube VR channel PSVR Without Parole purports to have new information about Sony's next generation virtual reality hardware. PSVR Without Parole claims to have sourced fresh information from a private conference Sony held on Tuesday for prospective PSVR 2 developers, the occurrence of which was independently corroborated by Upload VR. So, jumping into what they're talking about, the codename for the platform is NGVR, obviously stands for Next Generation VR, but it'll probably be called PSVR 2 when it's released. So we're going to get a little bit nerdy with the technical details. Once again, Adam and I, this is not necessarily our specialty, but we could talk about it a little bit. As Uploaded VR reported in May, PSVR's 2 display will have a resolution of 2000 by 2040 per eye, which is a solid little bump above the world's current most popular headset, the Oculus Quest 2. In addition, PSVR Without Parole suggests the screen will utilize OLED display technology and support high dynamic range, HDR, potentially giving it a more vibrancy, deeper blacks, and greater brightness than Quest 2 more typical non-HDR LCD display. So we're already seeing a little bit of a better screen and a little bit more color there. The new kit will supposedly feature a 110-degree field of view, up 10 degrees from Sony's original PSVR, and around 20 better than the slightly scuba-masked feeling Oculus Quest 2. This field of view will be accomplished in part via Fresnel lens, which come with pros and cons that the Quest users are already well acquainted with. Perhaps the biggest news back in May was the PSVR 2 will feature eye tracking capability, which will make possible a much desired performance improving technique called foveated rendering. Today's video suggests that PSVR 2 will also feature another new technology called flexible scaling resolution, or FSR, which concentrates the rendering resources on the player's area of focus to further reduce the load on PS5 hardware. So as I'm reading it, what it'll kind of do is where you're looking is where it'll spend most of the time, rendering, and then kind of as it gets further out from where you're focusing, it'll kind of not render as much. But it's not entirely clear how FSVR will differ from foveated rendering. As for the controllers, PSVR Without Parole corroborates Upload VR's information from May that PSVR 2 will have some haptic feedback in the headset to help reduce motion sickness, apparently via a rotary motor. Also back in March, the Sony blog revealed PSVR's 2 controller design. We've already talked about that in depth, but today's video describes these as capacitive touch sensors that have an analog quality to them that will let them sense the positions of your fingers even when your fingertips hover over them. PSVR 2 will be able to use this data to make guesses about pinky and ring finger positions, ostensibly allowing for more natural in-game gesturing. Ooh, that might not work well. Finally, for some more interesting tidbits dropped via the vid concerning software. The claim is that Sony is looking to move away from so-called VR experiences, referring to things like, where you're Batman, like the Batman detective game, or, where you're going in a scuba tank and just seeing some sharks swim around. And they're going to go for more console quality AAA games. Further, it said that Sony thinks the best way to accomplish this is to create hybrid games that support both conventional display and virtual reality, sort of like Capcom did with Resident Evil 7. Apparently, the intent is to let the player download just the version they want to play, standard or VR, saving on download size. So they didn't talk about PSVR as well. So it says there wasn't any explicit mention of PSVR 2 being backwards compatible with PSVR games, which seems mildly concerning. A lack of backward compatibility with older VR purchases would be a big misstep, so they're expecting that Sony will take care of its earliest adopters. However, Sony did mention intent to make a big push to remaster PSVR 1 games to new hardware. So it'll be interesting where that goes. So, Adam, first of all, did you find that PSVR, like the original one, was a success? And do you think that PSVR 2 is going to exceed that?
I personally don't know, financially whether it was a success or not. I thought that it did exactly what it needed to do when it first came out. Now, I didn't buy one because I don't have the money to kind of burn around to, get a virtual reality experience along with everything else. I barely afford new games, so what the hell am I going to do with a VR controller? But I figured that what they were doing was a bit different from what all the other VRs were doing, in that you need a full room for most VRs like your Oculus and things like that, whereas PSVR you can just as easily do on your couch because it's more just
Mhm.
looking around. There are some experiences where you would still want to have that extra space, but like you could play Borderlands in VR and just
Mhm.
literally you're just playing and just being able to look around like you would if you were actually there. And I thought that was a really good idea. And furthermore, because they want to concentrate on more of a AAA experience, like you said with Resident Evil 7, it makes perfect sense. Because if you got first person games, it makes perfect sense to throw it in VR. It seems pretty
Mhm.
easy to me that, like, if Call of Duty is going to come out with a first person shooter every year, that's a great moneymaker for people who own a VR thing. Because I don't know if it means that they'll have them bought separately, or if maybe like you pay an extra $20 on top of the normal version and you get the VR version. I don't know if it's a separate purchase entirely at the same price. Not really sure, but either way, like that's going to be the key with PSVR 2 or whatever they end up naming it. It's going to be that it needs to have a game library that makes it worthwhile. Otherwise, it's just what it always has been. It's just, extra hardware for someone who has a little bit extra to burn and just kind of have sit on the shelf once in a blue moon. But I mean, in terms of what we've seen, like we've already seen some of the what the controllers are looking like and the extra haptics and stuff. I think everything on paper gives it something that at least intrigues me when normally I wouldn't even think twice about getting something like this. Now I'm actually like, okay, now I'm curious. Now let's just see what you got for the games, and that might actually like push me further into maybe saving up for that rather than something else. Will it be enough? Who knows? But at this current juncture, I'm at least curious, which is far more than the original VR ever did for me.
Yeah, I think PSVR, the original, I had one and it was cool. And I feel like, was it a success? I'd say yes, but with like a caveat, like they went an interesting route in that they were for more or less like they were the approachable, they were the, one that you can go into that didn't require $1,000 gaming PC and then, resources. So they were an easy entry for people to get in and test the waters and kind of explore the technology. Was it a hit in terms of having master games you had to play? No, I mean there were games that were worth playing, but not all of them. There was no real sort of triple A must-have game. I mean, I'm thinking like Beat Saber was a good one, and like the PlayStation Studios didn't do a huge amount. Like I remember there was like Rigs, and there was
Blood
Blood
and
and
Truth was
Truth
a
or something
big
like that.
one, yeah.
But it wasn't in the sense that it lit the world on fire, that it was a must play game. Like it was like if you have it, it's worth getting. But like they kind of got weird. I think one of the hiccups with the PSVR was the fact that they never came out with a motion controller. The fact that they were using the PlayStation Move that they had created before, I think, kind of hindered it and limited it. And so then they came up with I forget what it was, the gun that they had, which is basically just like some PVC piping with a Move controller attached to it.
Oh, okay,
And
yeah, yeah.
and those became hard to get. And so like even now I don't even know where you could buy one. Oh, and here's another good one is was the that's the Blood and Truth, but there was another one. It was I Expect You to Die, and that was another good sort of
Oh,
one
that's
that
right,
my
yeah.
wife and I enjoyed playing. But once again, it was never one of those like, oh man, you have to play this. Watching them people play it kind of makes me want to play this now.
that's
I might have to
that's
boot
always
it.
the thing with VR games. Like whenever you see it being played, you're like, man, it looks so good, and then you
I
play it
might
and be like, all right, this is pretty fun, but like I spent a
I might
lot of
have to
money
boot my
for this. It's
PSVR.
always the challenge with VR.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Now, here's where I'm thinking. Like, I think having a better controller was going to be good. Um, and I think there's benefits there. My concern is I'm hearing all these things that they're talking about, and what I hear is that this sounds expensive,
Yeah,
and I think that is going to be a big challenge for PSVR 2. Is that you now have this console, and I imagine, like, I think when PSVR 2 came out, it was like $250, and that was just basically for the headset. That didn't even include the controllers, which you had to buy separately. And now with these new controllers, I imagine they're going to get bundled in. I could see this thing costing 400-500 bucks for one of these, and that's a pretty big ask without a killer app there.
you might be paying the price for a console just to have the VR version of said thing. So
Exactly. I think one of the other things, and they haven't talked about it yet, that I think is going to be a key a key focus for this is that if they don't have if it's wired, I think that's gonna be another hindrance. Like for me, I've got my system, but it's like, oh, I got to take out the wires, I got to plug it all in, and it's cumbersome and it's annoying. So I think wireless is going to be a key factor that I think will kind of make or break the console, because like it's not nice to have it sit there with all the wires and stuff on your front display. So I think they need something that is wireless.
I mean, unless like as we've said before with other consoles, like we talked about the Switch recently for the similar reasons. Like if there's a library that's actually really, really good on the VR, it might actually like let you kind of like be okay with some of the things, like you said, the wire mess and things like that. Because if the games are that much fun and worth it, then maybe it's something that you actually look at and be like, you know what, it is a bit of a hassle, but man, it's fun when I get to use it.
100%. And this was going to bring up my next question. What do you think of the decision of Sony to move away from what it called the PSVR experiences and go for a more AAA gaming experience?
Well, I mean, I can say it in one thing only. If you want to do a VR experience, let Oculus take that. You're a game console, make games. I don't care about experiences. You know, when I first saw the trailer, for example, of the Final Fantasy 15 VR experience, I'm like, oh, okay, so we're just gonna sit in a car and stare at Sydney. I'm like, okay, that's something, I guess, but like, what's the game? I'm not interested in some bare bones experience where you do like the bare minimum just so you can see some pretty stuff in VR. Which, don't get me wrong, if it's pretty, it's pretty. But I'm more interested in playing a game because that's what I expect to do on a PlayStation console, not some random VR system that comes from an outside source that isn't necessarily a game company. So if they want to do like the actual like, okay, we're only going to make AAA games and stuff, like again with something like say Skyrim VR was, or Borderlands 2 VR, and if we translate this into any first party game, like playing a Doom game in VR, or playing Call of Duty or Battlefield or anything like that, like that's something that gets my attention a little bit more, because even if they're a little bit wonky, it's still like, instead of your library and you're staring at Blood and Truth, which most people don't know what it is, or Astro Rescue Bot, I think it was, or Moss, or things like
Astro's
that.
Playroom, yeah.
Well, Astro's Playroom was the one that came with the PS5.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Yeah, you're right.
I think Rescue Bot was the name, or Astro Bot or something like that. But like, you think of all these games and they don't get your attention. But if you look at your interest in buying a PSVR and you see Call of Duty games on the shelf, and you see Doom games on the shelf, and you see things like that, like if the next, well, I guess it wouldn't be Fallout because that's Bethesda now, which we'll get into, I guess, not too long after, but for anything of like that gets your attention a little bit faster than say Moss ever will. Like, no offense to those developers, but like Moss versus say Battlefield 6 or whatever it ends up being, the first VR Battlefield game, if that's a direction that ends up happening, you're gonna probably be more interested in that big name than you will Moss, which, that's what gets people to buy these systems, because who knows how many PSVRs are still sitting on store shelves that are just waiting to be sold.
I think there's an issue though. The idea, like having a AAA gaming experience, I think is what PSVR needs. My question is, how many people are going to adopt it? I mean, for third parties to go ahead and build a VR component game, like unless Sony is footing the bill for that, like I don't see a lot of developers jumping on the bit to create a whole other way of playing their game. I mean, that there's development costs and development questions that are raised by making it accessible for VR. Especially if you have something like a third party game, like how do you do that? So I think there's challenges that are going to bring it across. The other thing that kind of, I think, is a detriment to it is the idea that Sony has tried in the past to get their first party studios to be the flagships of their games. And I think of things like Zipper Interactive, which was the developers for the PlayStation Vita. They did Unit 13, I think. They got shut down. Gorilla Cambridge did the Riggs PSVR first party game. They got shut down. And then even like the Manchester studio that was founded in 2015 to work on a PSVR game, they were shut down before they even closed. So Sony doesn't have a great track record in terms of building parties or assigning party like studios to build first party games for these sort of niche systems. And then if it doesn't work well, they close them. And so I can't think of any developers that would be chomping at the bit or willingly taking the mantle of being the one to make a PSVR AAA game, because there's a lot riding on it. And if you don't get it right, there's not a good track record of what happens to those studios.
Well, I mean, this would be a great time then to bring in an old franchise and give that a good shot. Like maybe this is where Killzone comes back into the fray, and maybe you take a shot at that, because that's probably what you have to do first. You have to take a couple of major games and VRify them, and you would have to come straight from first party studios at Sony, so that way you at least can show you're serious. And if they end up doing okay, like even if PSVR 2 sales might not be great at the time, but if the games get really, really high reviews, that gets people's attention. And maybe you can start using that to go to other developers and say, hey, like, is this something you'd be interested in? If they're a little bit weary, say, like, look, we'll front part of the cost, we'll do a deal with you, like, whatever else. Because, I mean, we've seen this before with developers working on, exclusive content for Sony or Microsoft or anything else like that. So Sony, I'm sure, could, like, say, like, look, we'll do this brand deal with you guys. We'll maybe shoot a little bit of money your ways to cover some of the cost. Like, there's always a bunch of ways they can do it, because they're gonna have to make a good push to really get this one out of the park. Because I mean, I don't know what the financial results were of the original console, or I guess the original hardware, but they really need to make this one stick, I would imagine. So I figure they're gonna take a pretty good shot at it this time, instead of just kind of haphazardly throw a few games out into the ether. I think they know that they have to do a little bit more on this one to kind of get the attention. And it won't just be the hardware, even though it's gotten my foot at least in the door, but it's going to take a lot more than that to really like keep me in there, shut the door behind me, and grab a hold of this thing. So there's some work to be done, but at least as we get closer to knowing what it's going to look like, what it's going to play like, what might even be announced for it that we don't know about yet, it's at least generating more of a buzz, and I think the first one ever did, and I think that's already a win in their book. Now it's just a matter of following through.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just looking here, and they said that the original PSVR, as of January 1st, 2020, had sold 5 million units. So clearly it was a success, and they knew it was a small little project. No, that's really good. And I'm not trying to be negative about this. I want a PSVR 2. I liked my PSVR 1. I hope it succeeds. However, I'm getting very much PlayStation Vita vibes, and that's concerning to me. PlayStation Vita had a lot of great technology behind it. Like, it was a technologically powerful machine, and it died on the grapevine. And it was supposed to have first party developed games focused on it, and then it died. And it was basically because of the concerns that I have for this, is that it was very expensive. So not a lot of people got in. A lot of game developers made these games. They didn't sell through quickly because they were too expensive to make, and for the player base that they had to do it. So like, I want it to succeed. I do, but I am very much getting, like I said, a PlayStation Vita vibe from it, and that concerns me. So I want it to do well, but yeah.
I mean, only time will tell, and I'm holding out that we actually get something pretty good, because I've said it before, like, every time we invent something new, it's always going to be really rough when it first starts. I'm hoping that what this one specifically does is shows us what we're going to get towards now. Like, we're now in the steps of like, okay, now we're starting to get a hang of it. Now let's start making some cool stuff for it. So I'm kind of hoping for that.
Yeah, like I am too. I just, like I said, I'm getting some vibes that don't jive well.